Okay, so the video that I uploaded yesterday explaining what had happened in the Australian federal election on Saturday and trying to convey the scale of the victory for the Labor Party was actually my most viewed video ever on this platform. And I thought it was only fair as a show of appreciation to come back, answer some of the questions that were asked generally about both Australian politics and a couple more specific questions about this election. So first things first is the confusing naming convention around Australian politics, and particularly right-wing politics, because I use the term conservative coalition when referring to the mainstream right-wing parties in Australia, and that coalition is made up of 4 different parties. Some people were asking about that. And this is where things get a little bit confusing for American viewers, and even quite a lot of people around the Western world. So in Australia, the 4 parties in the coalition are the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party, the National Party, and the Country Liberal Party. So these 4 parties represent mainstream conservatism in Australia, and they have some very interesting and very similar, and I imagine very confusing names, but I'm going to do my best to explain why they are called that and what all 4 of these parties do differently. Okay, so first of all, why does Liberal mean conservative in Australia? Well, if you go back to when the country was first starting, there were really 3 major factions in Parliament in the early days of Australia. That was socialists, liberals, and conservatives. So in the first few years of Australia, elected liberals and elected socialists would work together to form government and govern the country. But then there was an event called the Fusion, where those liberal members of Parliament went to the Conservatives and basically merged with them into a new party, specifically to oppose the growing influence of the then socialist Labor Party. And when this fusion came together of Conservatives and Liberals, they just branded themselves as the Liberal Party. And really all they did was oppose the Socialists. So Liberal in Australia just became a term that broadly meant to oppose socialism. And then over time, that just evolved into a catch-all term for opposing the Labor Party and being right-wing. But anyway, that original Liberal Party from the early 1900s fell apart, went through a couple different iterations, and over decades it eventually just evolved into the modern Liberal Party, which is the most mainstream conservative party. This party tries at times to brand itself as more moderate, and it tries to represent Australians everywhere. It will run candidates in just about every single part of the country, and they are traditionally the largest member of the Conservative coalition in Australia. Now, the second most important party in the coalition is the National Party. They are basically a party that was formed specifically to represent rural farmers who didn't think that the Liberal Party or its previous versions really represented them enough, and they are known for being a pretty socially conservative party. Now, the Liberal National Party, I'm realizing how ridiculous this all sounds, is a unity party where the Liberal Party and the National Party in Queensland basically united to form one single party specifically in that state. Queensland is our most rural state and our most conservative state, and that was the one place in the country where the Nationals were more dominant than the Liberals, and it just got to a point where it was so unstable and odd that they decided things would be simpler if in that one state they just operated as one unified party. And then a similar situation happened in the Northern Territory where Nationals and Liberals came together in like the 1960s and just formed one unified party there to represent Conservatives in the Northern Territory. So that is Australian conservatism. You have 2 parties to represent specific states and territories, 1 party to specifically represent regional interests, and then 1 normal conservative party at the top there. So anyway, that is how Australia's very confusingly named, multifaceted conservative coalition works. That took way too long. Anyway, on to the next question. Why are the Greens doing so poorly in this election? Now, the Greens are a party to the left of Labor, and it seems that they have basically had all of their progress wiped off the map over the last couple of years as they really got a beating from the Labor Party in this election. This is going to sound really confusing, and I apologize ahead of time. The Greens in some specific seats, would actually prefer that the Liberal Party does better so that they can make the two-party preferred vote the final count for who is actually elected. In a seat in Parliament, this is the ideal situation for the Greens. They want to come second to the Liberal Party and then have the Labour Party coming third so that all those Labour preferences will go to the Greens and then the Greens on the final count will beat the Liberals. That is not happening in this election. The Liberal vote is collapsing so much that in some of these instances, the Liberal candidate is coming third, in which case it is the Liberal Party votes that are going to determine who wins between the Labour Party and the Greens in that final count. And to put it pretty simply, Liberal voters think that the Greens are more left-wing than Labour. So of course they're going to preference Labour before the Greens. So in these seats where the Greens currently have power, what's happening is that the final count is going to be between Labour and the Greens, and just too many preferences are going to go Labour's way, and then they aren't going to win the seat. Next, can you talk about the Trump effect? Yes, I can. I don't really think it was nearly as big of a deal here as it was in Canada. I mean, of course, Trump throwing global markets into chaos certainly didn't help the Liberals, but if we're being honest, with how bad the Liberal campaign was, anything Trump was doing was just pouring fuel onto the fire that was already out of control and burning the house down. So he did have an effect, but I don't think it was as drastic as it was in Canada, and the Liberals really have themselves to blame first and foremost. Okay, this next one wasn't something that anyone specifically asked me, but it's something that I've seen going around, particularly on other platforms when I talk about this, which is, why was the Liberal campaign actually so bad? Well, my best explanation for that is that you have to understand, in 2022, the Liberal Party was crippled in a particularly horrific way. The way that it lost, a big part of it was that independent candidates were specifically taking seats from the most moderate Liberals. The most progressive Liberals were losing their seats. And so at the end of the night, what you had was a Liberal Party that was badly bruised and disproportionately made up of much more right-wing MPs than usual. Their centrist faction basically vanished. So the moderate faction of the Liberal Party was basically half unemployed. And to keep a lot of the staffers and people that work for the organisation around, the Liberal Party basically hired them into the party organisation itself. But that caused a very clear divide where all the members in Parliament for the Liberal Party were disproportionately very right-wing, but the party managing organisation itself, the corporate side of things, was far, far more moderate. I think the best way to put it is that if the captain and the crew on a ship disagree about which way they are trying to steer the ship, then that thing is either just going to end up going in circles or crashing into the rocks and sinking. Are you going to make more Elder Scrolls meme videos? Probably not. I don't think that most of my following that is primarily here for political stuff wants to see Dagoth from Morrowind and his takes on certain cities, so that's probably just a one-off thing for the time being. Anyway, I hope those answers provided any context or helped explain some of the stuff that we're seeing in Australia. Australia has a very interesting, very unique, and a very weird political system, and it's one that I love, which is, it's just fun to look at, and it produces what I think are pretty interesting outcomes, and ones that are more democratic than certain parts of the world. So if you guys have any other questions about it, I'm happy to do a third video on the subject of Australian politics, so by all means, please ask away, and thank you guys, genuinely thank you for the support that you've shown me on hopefully this video, and certainly the last one. I genuinely appreciate it.